Divine Decode, where we explore the spiritual systems, symbols, and structures that shape human experience. Today's guest is Jim Marshall, a true polymath and the creator of Septemics, a revolutionary system that charts the 7 levels of human consciousness and behavior across dozens of life domains. With over 50,000 hours of deep study, from theology to metaphysics, engineering to psychology, Jim's work is not just an academic synthesis, it's a spiritual technology for those ready to understand, measure, and elevate their state of being. Get ready to decode consciousness in a way you've never heard before. So, Jim, septemics is a term many may be hearing for the first time, right? So, can you please explain it? Can you please start with explaining what it is and how it reveals the hidden patterns behind the human behavior that exist?
Okay. First of all, I should say one sentence to give some context to this, which is that I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I developed a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septemics and published in the book Septemics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. Now, Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to humans occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word Septemics means of or pertaining to 7. So Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales, each of which is unique. And together, they span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any problem, dilemma, situation, difficulty that any person has regarding people can be successfully analyzed by one or more of these scales, usually more than one. Now, as to divinity, these scales lead you from the lowest condition of mankind to the highest condition of mankind across 35 different axes. So when you get to the top of the scale, you are being dumped at the door of divinity.
Yes, right. That was really insightful. And I want to know, how did your own educational and professional journey led to this breakthrough framework? Like, it might have like really contributed to it, right? So, how did it really lead to this breakthrough framework that you've discovered?
Well, the story really starts when I was accepted into engineering school at the age of 16. Now, of course, at the time, I thought I was going to be engineering physical things, such as airfoils and motors and electrons. But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, it was clear that I wanted to engineer the human psyche because it is the area of greatest mystery, of greatest unknown, and more importantly, it is the area in which we as a race are failing miserably. 95% of the problems in industrialized society are because people do not understand people, don't understand the wife, the husband, the boss, the son, the next door neighbor. This is vast. And that is why, for example, in the United States, more than 50% of the people who get married get divorced. Clearly, they did not understand the person. So, to make a long story short, I had a long career as a human development engineer, where I worked one-on-one with hundreds of clients of every description for cumulatively many thousands of hours.
Hmm.
And all of my clients improved. But incidentally, I started to notice that I could predict the outcome of the session. I never told that to anyone, but I made notes. And as the decades rolled by, it became obvious to me that the client was at a specific level on a specific scale that I had previously observed and recorded. And as a result of our interaction, he would go up to the next highest level on that scale. Now, this happened thousands and thousands of times, and every time it occurred, it verified my hypothesis because the clients knew absolutely nothing about how I did, what I was thinking, my techniques, my strategies, my theories. They knew absolutely nothing. All they knew was they came into me with a problem or a situation or an unwanted condition, and I helped them resolve it. So by 1995, I had simply observed and recorded about 32 scales that just presented themselves in the sessions. And you have to realize, after I would see this in the session, I would then go out of the session into the real world, and I would see exactly the same phenomena. People would manifest these levels who didn't know me, who I wasn't even talking to. And again, that's very reliable scientific information. So, also about that same time, I was pondering a difficult client one day, and I was looking at a 6-level scale that I knew was correct because I had been using it for decades. And I realized suddenly that the reason I couldn't figure out this client is that she was at a level on that scale that I had not previously observed. In other words, it was actually a 7-level scale. Now, as soon as I saw what the level was, it was obvious to me where to insert it into the 6-level scale. And when I did, at that moment, it manifested mathematically. And it went from being a line, which is what a scale is, to a plane, meaning a whole body of data, where there are all these interlocking, intersecting data relative to the scale. And I said, whoa, whatever this is, it has to be natural law because it has mathematics embedded in it. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I took 26 semesters of math and loved every minute of it. The whole point of math is you start with a formula or an equation and you coax data out of it. That is how Einstein found E equals mc squared, by that same process. So when you have data present themselves like that, that is a mathematical manifestation. So I then thought, wait a minute, I wonder how many of these other scales that I have are actually 7-level scales that had not been developed all the way, because you have to realize I wasn't developing anything. I was just helping my clients and making notes. So, knowing what I was looking for, I inspected all these other scales. And in a short period of time, each of them went to 7 levels. And when it did, it manifested mathematically. So now I had 32 7-level scales, all of which had mathematics embedded in them. Having gone to school for 28 years, I said to myself, I've never seen anything like this before. This looks like a new subject to me, one that could really help people. And then I thought, wait a minute, I could go from helping people by the hundreds, which is what I had been doing as human development engineer, to helping people by the millions if I put this in a book and get it out. So I'm going to have to write a book. So the first draft was finished in December of 95, and I immediately sent it out to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees in a variety of subjects. And they all responded very positively. They had different responses, but very positive responses. And that told me that this was exactly what I thought it was. A new subject that people would get, that would really help them. I then spent the next 25 years working on this book. Because, of course, first I had to discover the phenomena, and I've kind of already explained how I did that, although I did find 3 more skills as I was writing the book. Then I had to take this data and use it to craft a workable philosophic system. Now, as an engineer, like all engineers, I'm only interested in results and facts. To an engineer, opinions and beliefs are irrelevant. So I had to construct something that would work for everyone all the time. In the engineering world, you are not allowed to say oops. You can't just have the plane fall out of the sky and you say, whoops, I didn't get that one right. It has to work, whatever it is. So I had to craft this to work for every person all the time, and that took 20 years. Then, the most time consuming aspect of this was expressing this in a way that would make sense to the average reader of English. And I know I succeeded at that because I've been watching people respond to this now for almost 30 years. People get this. A guy opens the book, he looks at it, he says, yeah, this makes sense. You don't have to have a college degree to understand this because I was very careful to explain it in a way that the average reader would understand. So that's where this came from.
That's actually quite fascinating. That's really, really fascinating. It is actually like you've created a real agnostic map in which the soul and mind both have a way to navigate through with precision. So yeah, that's right. You've developed over 30 distinct scales with Septemics, right? So why is identifying someone's exact position on a scale like really so transformational in their personal or spiritual development? How is it creating an importance in their lives?
Okay, every time you correctly spot someone, whether it's yourself or another, on any scale, you have an insight. And insight is spiritual development. That's what spiritual development is, having an insight, or you could call it a realization, or you could call it an epiphany. It amounts to the same thing. And that happens 100% of the time in using this material if you use it correctly. So, when you spot, let's say, yourself on a scale, let's say you spot your level 4, you have an insight. You now understand yourself better, and you will have realizations like, oh, that's why I could never get along with Mary, or something like that. Cumulatively, these add up to spiritual development. That is what my practice was about. Now, when you're at the lower rungs of spiritual development, it looks like psychology. In other words, the guy comes in and he says, oh, I'm depressed or I have anxiety or something, and you help him with that. But as you keep going, it starts to look more and more like self-realization, spiritual realization, enlightenment, as you move up the scales. And if you study the book, you'll see that is how these scales are. They go from the highest possible level of human sentience in that sphere to the lowest possible level. In other words, every scale covers every human being, which is another way of saying every person is at some level on every scale. There's no question about that. The question is, at what level is the person? And when you spot that, you have a realization. So you can then help the person. Now, once you have the correct level, you can then move up to the next level up because it's the next level up. In other words, if you're on the second floor, you want to go to the third floor, you just go up one flight of stairs. If you're on the first floor, you can't get to the third floor without going through the second, regardless of how you go, by stairs or elevator or escalator or whatever. You have to go through the second. And that is what these scales are like. A level is never skipped. And let me explain it to you this way. Isaac Newton famously shined a ray of white light through a prism. And what came out on the other side was the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Now, the rainbow is always that sequence. If you were to adjust the frequency on the light, it would go from red to orange. And then if you adjust it further, it will go from orange to yellow. There is no way to get from red to yellow without going through orange. This is actually good because it tells you where you are and what you have to do to get to where you are. So let's say you find yourself at level 4. You target yourself for level 3. If you were to target yourself for level 1 or 2, you would certainly fail because it's too steep a gradient. But if you target yourself for level 3, you will succeed if you make a serious effort because it's the next level up. And all this is natural law. These scales are true the same way that the Pythagorean theorem is true, or Newton's 3 laws of motion. So some of the people have said to me, what book is your book like? And I have to tell them in all candor, I don't think there's ever been a book like this before, at least on Earth. But every one of these scales is expressed in what you could call a table or a spreadsheet. And that table is very similar to the periodic table of elements. Now, you probably have seen the periodic table of elements. Most people do when they're 12 or 13 or 14 for the first time. And you look at it and you say, after a while, oh, this makes sense. Hydrogen is 1, helium is 2, lithium is 3, and it just goes on like that horizontally and vertically, which is why it works. Now, originally, Mendeleev had 79 elements that he put into this, but we just keep adding elements to it because it works, because it's true. So everybody in the science world has this. Each one of these tables that you see in the book is a periodic table for the corresponding subject. And if I may, I'd like to tell you the names of those corresponding subjects. And you'll see that many of these, particularly at the upper realm, are distinctly spiritual. They're targeting you toward the divine. May I do that?
So, do you find that this specificity often accelerates breakthroughs compared to general self help advice that normally people get?
Yes, this is a foolproof system. And the reason it's a foolproof system is it's natural law. So let me tell you the names of the scales, and then you'll see right away how relevant this is. Of the 35 scales, 24 of them are individual scales, 11 of them are group scales. These are the individual scales: the scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are the group scales: the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Any one of these scales by itself could dramatically improve the life of the reader. I mentioned, for example, the scale of spiritual identity. Every human has one of 7 spiritual identities. When you find what level you are at, it is greatly clarifying. And that's also when you find where other people are at. This explains a lot. If someone is at a much lower level on this scale, you could talk to him for the rest of your life about Hinduism or Buddhism or Jainism. He's not going to get it. He does not have that consciousness. You would have to bring him up the scale and get him to realize that he is a spiritual being, an indestructible, immortal being that has infinite potential. And as you ascend these scales, you are realizing your potential more and more and more across 35 different axes. So some of my clients would move on one scale, some of them would move on another scale. And that's what you generally find. Most of us are high on some scales and low on other scales. So this is very user friendly. And as you get closer to the top, you become closer and closer to divinity or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it.
Vague growth often it leads to vague results. So you quite literally explained very well, and this kind of clarity it feels revolutionary. In fact, yeah. So your background spans theology, metaphysics, and human development. How does Septemics integrate spiritual wisdom with scientific structure in it?
Well, the structure in it is a pathway to divinity or enlightenment. In other words, this is a ladder. I have solved the gradient problem that has bedeviled mankind for 6,000 years. And let me tell you what I mean by that. People have problems and dilemmas and situations, and they can't resolve them. More than 99% of the time, it's because they don't know the gradient. You have to know the gradient. In other words, every good teacher, facilitator, guru, therapist in the world understands that human development must be done on a gradient, meaning you have to pick up the person at the level he is at and then move him up to the next level that is accessible to him. And that is what these scales tell you. If a guy's at level 5 on the scale of choice, he can only go to level 4 or level 6. There are no other possibilities. Now, when you pick the guy up and you see he's at level 5, you then can, you know what you're going for. You're going for level 4. And you can do this with yourself. You target yourself for level 4, and you have to realize that as you do this, you have insights. When you have this insight, oh, I'm at level 5, that explains a lot. That starts to open the door to you getting to level 4. So you will be able to get to level 4 because it's the next level. So the problem in all of these practices is the absence of gradients. You can't just take a guy who is a couch potato and make him an Olympic athlete. There are too many intervening levels. You see this all the time in life, all the time, everywhere you go. Like countries go into other countries and say, well, we're going to make them a democracy. Well, if you look at the scale of government, democracy is level 3. I don't think there are any countries on earth at level 3. So if you pick up a country that's at level 5, you can't bring it to level 3. You have to bring it to level 4. That is possible. And it's the same thing with an individual. So if this guy has no cognizance that there is even such a thing as a spirit, good luck trying to get him to advance in your religion. He doesn't have the idea. So you have to bring him up the scale of spiritual identity. And that's true for all 35 of these. You have to pick up the person at the level he's at and move him to the next level up. That is progress. And if you do not proceed stepwise, you fail, which is mostly what we see when we look around the world. We see lots of failure. And it shows up as crime, insanity, war, terrorism, etc., etc., etc. So this is a pathway to divinity for the human race. You can read English reasonably well, and you want to improve yourself or others, this book is for you. Now, you might think, well, everyone wants to improve himself, and that's not true. There's a lot of people who have no interest whatsoever in improving themselves. Psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, professional criminals, war criminals, corrupt politicians, etc., etc. Lots of people, no interest at all. They're interested in maybe cleaning out your bank account, stealing your car. That's what they're interested in. So you have to. I've actually calculated that about half the human race is interested in improving oneself or other.
Yeah, right. So, would you say the system is equally applicable to both personal transformation and organizational development?
Yes, the scale of management is absolutely about organization and administration. But uh, in a sense, all of these scales are relevant because it depends on what's going on. So, for example, let's say you are the CEO of a corporation and you observe that one of your vice presidents is falling down on the job. He's showing up late, he's not getting his work done, he's leaving early, he's losing his temper. You can put, pull out this book and spot where this guy is on some of these scales. And then you can bring him in and say, Joe, look at this. So I'm getting an advisory here that the meeting end time has been reached.
Oh no, you do not have to care about it. It's okay. It was just scheduled right like that. You can continue.
So what I was saying is, you don't know what's going on with this guy. Maybe he's having trouble with his wife. Maybe he's taking drugs. Maybe he's got a disease. See, you don't know. And that is why you need 35 skills because uh, if, if it's a human being, you can always find one or more skills that will help you analyze what's going on. Maybe it's the scale of physical fitness. I had a client in recently who's having all kinds of difficulties with his work, and it turned out the guy never gets enough sleep. Never. That's a serious problem. That's on the scale of physical fitness. So he needs to resolve that. And I told him that he needs to resolve that issue if he's going to move ahead. So that's true for all of these scales. If a guy is at or near the bottom of the scale of attack, he can't be in the police or the military. He just can't do it. If a person is near the bottom of the scale of thought, he cannot be a scientist or an engineer or a mathematician. Not possible. Now, he can be brought up to level 3, which is analytical thought, which is the thought that is used in STEM subjects. But until you do that, he's not going to get it. And so that is why this is a foolproof system, because you find where the person is at, you bring him up a level, one level, and then when you bring him up that level, then there's a possibility to bring him up to the next level. I have been pushing myself up these levels most of my life, even before I knew this was a subject, because I knew the material, because I discovered it in my sessions. And so my life has gotten very easy.
Yeah. It's actually right that the intersection of soul and structure that you mentioned, that's where the real magic happens. So true. Which of the scales in Septemics do people resonate with the most? Like you would have got that right, wherein people just resonate with that one scale. Um, whenever they encounter your work, which is that one scale that they most resonate with.
There's no answer to that question because every person is different and every situation is different. The power of this subject is that it spans the spectrum of human experience. There is no generality. Generalities are what's wrong with the human race. Like a person says, oh, you can't trust women. That's a generality. Or a person who says, all Jews are cheap. That's a generality, okay? Both of those things are equally false. That's where the trouble comes from. If you look at what's going on now between Iran and Israel, the Iranians have been saying for 46 years, we want to wipe out Israel. Okay? That is a generality. The truth is that some of the people in Israel are nice and some of them aren't. That's true for every group on earth. And it's a matter of degree. Some guy is a wonderful person, the other guy is maybe not so wonderful. And then you have another guy who's a criminal. So you have to be specific in helping people. And when you ask for a question like, which one resonates best with people, there's no answer to that question. It's like dividing 3 by 0. It's undefined. It makes no sense. Depends on the person, depends on the context. You use it. So if you have a friend who keeps telling you he's got this relationship that's a problem, have him look at the scale of relationships. It probably will help him. The scale of literacy probably won't help him. So it depends on the person. So every person is going to have a different take on this, a different entree. And you will find, if you use this, you'll find a certain scale will really change your life. And then you'll sort of defocus from that. And then you'll find another scale that really changes your life. And that's what this is for. You just keep using it. There is no ceiling for this. Even if you live 1,000 years, you keep using the same process because you meet new people and there are new situations and new difficulties. And so you find the applicable one and you apply it. And so the sky is the limit with this.
So what in your view is that one scale that you believe every person should explore this one scale to begin their journey of conscious evolution? Like it would help them and it would be the most beneficial one.
Again, there is no answer to that question. That is a non-septemic question. What you do is you find the scale that you think fits the person. For example, you might find somebody who is what you might call a control freak. Well, look at the scale of control. Level 6 on the scale of control is what we describe as a control freak. So if you can spot the person at the level, it opens the way to move him up to the next level. So this is very specific. This is not general. There are no generalities in connection with this.
That's powerful. Really good to know your points on that. For those new to this type of structured consciousness work, what's the simplest way to begin integrating the principles of Septemics into their daily awareness? How should they, just bring it into their daily life and the principles? How can they become their daily awareness routine?
My first recommendation is go to my website, which is septemics.com, Septemics, where you can see what many readers have said about it, what many journalists have written about it, what the reviews are. You can read sections of the book itself, and there's even a pre-recorded introduction to Septemics that you can listen to that explains it to a new person in 15 minutes. Once you do that, and of course there's a lot of other data there, which is all germane, now you start to get an idea what this is. Now, once you get the book, what I tell everybody is this is a textbook on an entirely new subject. So start on the first line of page 1 and read that one line and ask yourself, does this make sense to me? Do I get this? And if the answer is yes, go to line 2 and do the same thing. And go all the way through to the end of the book that way, studying it the same way you would study a chemistry text, a math text, an economics text, a biology text, where you skip nothing. And if you get stuck, look up words, get some help before you go on. Because if you go on, you're not going to get it. This is sequential. After you finish reading the book, go back to the beginning and read it again and find your level on every scale. By the time you finish that exercise, you will be a completely different person. Your whole consciousness will have expanded because you will have had at least 35 insights about yourself. What insights you have, that's personal and individual. So then you could, excuse me, at that point, you could use it to help other people by spotting the specific skill that's relevant and bringing it to bear.
Yeah, right. And what else would you say to someone? Like there are really those people who really get stuck on lower levels, right? And there is no way that they can rise, or they do not find a way to rise. So, what do you have to say to someone who believes that they're really stuck on a very like lower level and they can't rise and they need a solution to it?
Well, first of all, if the guy got this book and read it and understood it, he would realize this is a pathway to success across 35 axes. Whatever level you are at, you can always go to the next level up. That is always possible. Now, some skills are harder to move on than others. I call those persistent skills. And some of them are what I call volatile skills where you can change quickly. So, again, this is very specific. But without this book, you are stuck because you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going, and you don't know how to get there. But once you have the book, you know where you are in any one of these 35 contexts, where you're going, meaning what's the next level up, and how to get there, which is you go from one level to the next level up. So it's actually quite simple. You just have to have the data, which I'm giving to you.
Hmm, right, right. That's really hopeful for anybody who really needs to come out of it. And we are rightly not static beings, right? And awareness is always the first catalyst for any elevation and for any awareness. So yeah, Jim Marshall's Septemics gives us a language, a lens, and a ladder, one that helps decode the complexity of human behavior and consciousness into clear, actionable insight. If this conversation stirred something in you, take it as a signal to explore further. The path to mastery isn't random, it's mapped. Until next time on Divine Decode, stay curious, stay expansive, and keep rising through the levels, spanning off as you